So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We have interpretation available, so you can find the language that better suits to you. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this conversation on philanthropy by design, from intention to infrastructure. Today, we will explore how generosity in Latin America and the Caribbean is shaped not only by culture and community, but also by environments we build around it. The policies, incentives, and civic conditions that allow generosity to flourish. In fact, the Giving Tuesday report on generosity in the region in 2025 reminds us of something essential, and it is that generosity in our region is deeply relational. So people give through reciprocity, mutual aid, and person-to-person support long before they give through formal institutions. And these practices are powerful, but they are also largely invisible to traditional philanthropic metrics. In fact, much of our region generosity remains unmeasured and unrecognized, especially in the Caribbean, where many countries appear in only one uh, global index, for example. And this invisibility matters. Without data, we can't design enabling conditions that reflect our realities. And without enabling conditions, generosity can be constrained, even when the cultural will to give is strong. But also, that report highlights remarkable opportunities. For example, that we have a strong culture of giving that is relational, as I mentioned, because economic prosperity does not predict generosity necessarily. Some of the region's lower income country donate higher percentages of income than wealthier ones. And this means that generosity is not a luxury. It's a cultural asset that we have in our region. And when we nurture it intentionally, it strengthens civic resilience, trust, and democratic participation. Today, we have the privilege of hearing two perspectives on how generosity can be designed for, one led by government and one led by civil society. So we have today Ana Maria González Forero. She's a political scientist, holds a master's degree in education, and was an inaugural Obama Scholar at Columbia University in 2018. She has more than 17 years of experience in strategic leadership, international relations, and philanthropy, and she currently serves as senior advisor at the Presidential Agency for International Cooperation of Colombia, APC Colombia. And Ana Maria will share Colombia's experience developing a national philanthropy strategy, a landmark effort to build enabling conditions from the public sector. Anthea McLaughlin is CEO of the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance. Her journey spans championing service integration in New York City across child welfare and education to build a Caribbean philanthropic ecosystem. She's a multidisciplinary leader. She bridges philanthropy, policy, and community leadership to advance system change, climate justice, gender equity, and diaspora giving. And Anthea will bring us into the Caribbean context, what the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is working to create environment that recognizes and support the region's unique forms of giving. Both experiences remind us that generosity doesn't happen in a vacuum, it happens in ecosystem, and those ecosystems can be threatened, shaped, and expanded. So with that, let's begin. And I would like to invite Anthea to share the experience from the philanthropic field and the civil society field, and then connect with Ana Maria and the effort that the Colombian government has made to build this national philanthropy strategy. So Anthea, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria, for such a wonderful introduction. Sometimes when I hear people introduce, is that me really when you're speaking? But thank you for your introduction. And what you shared is what resonates with all of us in terms of understanding what generosity experiences are within the region, which is very much cultural. I'm going to place on the screen my presentation. And I just need you to give me screen sharing rights. Am I able to get it now? I don't have it anymore. See what you can do.
You can try now.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna let everybody see the screen. So yes, I would just, so again, formally, I would just like to say thank you to Giving Tuesday for inviting Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance to this platform to share the work of Carrefour and the importance of of generosity to the region. So let me begin by saying, with truth deeply rooted in the Caribbean, that generosity has always been part of how our communities live, support one another, and respond to need. It is embedded in family and faith and community diaspora and our traditions of collective responsibility. So today, the opportunity is to build on that cultural foundation. And my proposition, which you see on the screen, and which of course you heard from Maria, is that generosity is cultural. Philanthropy becomes transformative when we build the systems that allow generosity to transform and to travel farther. And so the questions I want to explore today are practical. Can we see the giving? Can we connect it? Can we strengthen the institutions around it? And can we create an environment that enables resources to move? And can philanthropy help redirect, align, and unlock capital for Caribbean priorities? And that is, in my opinion, what philanthropy by design really is all about, by making sure that we create a system that works for all and for all that live within the region. As here you would see, I have on the screen, generosity has always been infrastructure. And we know that long before we use the language of organized philanthropy, the Caribbean systems for moving resources, we've always had family remittances, we've always had church giving, we've always had community funds, diaspora support. You've heard words that I've used before. If you've heard me speak before, susu, partner, partners, box in hand. We have different ways of expressing generosity and how we give in the Caribbean. And of course, mutual aid and disaster solidarity is very much part of what we do. I would just like to share that these are not simple cultural traditions. They move money, they distribute risk, and they sustain families and communities, and that the economics are also quite significant. So we know, according to data, we have Inter-American Development data. There was a report that was done most recently, a dynamics report, where they talked about remittances. And in the Caribbean, it represents 5.4% of Caribbean GDP in 2024, which is the highest regional share in the world. And that compares to 4.4% in South Asia and 3.3% in Sub-Saharan Africa. And in terms of per capita terms, remittances average approximately $533 per person across the Caribbean. So diaspora generosity is not a peripheral conversation and is not peripheral to Caribbean economy. It's already part of our capital infrastructure and architecture, and that remittances support our households, it supports our consumption, our education, our housing, our health, our poverty reduction, while comparatively little is channeled into the productive investment. And so our challenge and our opportunity for all of us here sitting in, and we can talk together, is that how do we begin to channel this generosity into a space where they can actually provide commitment and resources into long-term development of our region in Latin America and the Caribbean. So can we create additional pathways for diaspora generosity and capital? Without disturbing the essential role of remittances, because we don't want to do that. They already play a role for our families. And also, like we've also seen, how collective action can make a difference. So on the screen, I have a photo here of our Caribbean tree planting project, which happened several years ago in 2020, where generosity made a significant difference in providing and implementing a project that planted 1.5 million trees across 22 countries and territories and engaging 5,000 young people, 347 organizations within the region. And I will say that the simple lesson here is that Caribbean already knows how to mobilize. The next challenge is connecting that capacity to institutions, evidence, and capital. And I think that is where, we could make that difference in our work. From generosity to ecosystem, this is a progression, as we all know. Generosity, we go give in our different ways. Intentional giving, we give towards a purpose. We do that all the time, personally and individually. And then we have organized philanthropy, where we structure resources more for public group. The key here, I think, is the critical transition is from collaboration to infrastructure is where the rubber hits the road. Because we know that because collaboration can end when a project or funding cycle ends, infrastructure is designed to endure that. We have some examples in the Caribbean, and I'll speak to one fund in particular, the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which is not simply financing individual conservation projects. It has built a regional financing architecture with an endowment, a national conservation trust funds, where resources can move at a country level. It has $75 million worth of resources supporting 12 countries, sub-accounts. And this is a way in which we can begin to solidify generosity and resources in a way that we can sustain financing. And I think that distinction is important. We know a project funds an activity. Infrastructure creates the capacity to fund activities repeatedly, locally, and over time. And that is the progression we need across Caribbean philanthropy. And so we want to have more examples of Caribbean Biodiversity Fund over the next 10 years. We want to be able to talk in the next 5 years that we have a real strong infrastructure. So the next frontier is more giving and better architecture for giving and investment. The slide 4 here, we have a region rich in generosity, but fragmented in visibility. And I'm now realizing my computer is going to um, die. 1 second. Now I'm putting it back on. Hope you can see that. Um, Infrastructure requires intelligence. Carafil originally identified 2050, in 2019, we did a quick study of funder mapping, and we mapped 1,888 funders in 26 countries, 21 sectors, approximately 22.8 billion in funding was identified. And what this exercise showed for us is that which we could not answer, even with all this information, who funds what? Where does the money originate? Where does it go? Where are the gaps? Who has access to it? And this is why Carrefour is now working with OECD Center on Philanthropy on a Caribbean philanthropy survey, because our challenge is not only capital, which it is visibility and allocation. And when we started the conversation this morning, visibility matters because it influences who gets funded. A credible organization that cannot be found cannot easily can be an organization that does not get finance. We understand that intrinsically. So data is part of the infrastructure through which capital moves. And ultimately, better data should help us make better decisions about where resources are needed and to be reallocated. The slide here is an important slide for all of us, and should cause us to pause a little bit when we look globally at how philanthropy is distributed. OECD, our partner, has shared in our consultations how philanthropy flows happen globally. Here, you would see, contributions to development. There was $68.2 billion between 2020 and 2023 of philanthropy contributions. And in the domestic arena, cross-border philanthropy, there was $15.4 billion in domestic philanthropy, split between 23% and 76%. Yet, for us in the Caribbean accounted for less than 1% of that philanthropic distribution. And of course, at the same time, much of our domestic philanthropy, informal giving, and diaspora support remains outside global subsets, so global data sets. And so we are really invisible to the global community, while at the same time we do experience significant generosity within the region, but we're nowhere to be found. And if we're nowhere to be found, what does that mean for us in terms of for us being able to leverage additional resources? And so the question is how much Caribbean philanthropy remains invisible, and how much capital reaches the Caribbean. So what we cannot see, we cannot easily access, we can't connect, we can't align it, we can't reallocate it, we can't grow it. And so all these questions are mute if we really don't understand what is happening in the Caribbean. And this we can talk about more. So domestic philanthropy Caribbean remains untracked here and invisible. And if you could see here, you'd see that China in particular has significant domestic philanthropy and is growing daily. In terms of cross-border philanthropy, adopting locally led development agenda in the Caribbean, here again is a startling statistics I just want to bring to your attention. 5% of the dollars went to local entities, and 95% went to international entities in the Caribbean and intermediaries in the Caribbean. Another cause for us to pause, not because international organizations are not unimportant, they are very important partners. But what we believe in locally led development, that the test is not simply what we say, the test is where the money lands, who receives it, who decides how it's spent, and what institutional capacity remains in the Caribbean when the funding ends. And I would just say that Haiti gives us an interesting example of another approach. We have a partner, W.K. Kellogg Foundation, that committed $30 million over 3 years to locally led initiatives in Haiti and challenged other funders to collectively commit another $60 million. And the model is important, not because of the money, but rather as rather than creating a traditional pooled fund, but that it controls, Kellogg Foundation use knowledge, long-standing relationships in Haiti, to help other funders identify and connect to credible Haitian-led organizations. So it can happen if we focus and if we're intentional about the importance of localization. So here, local leadership, trusted relationships, multiple funders, shared knowledge, capital moving, all these things make a difference here as well. Again, here speaks to, I'm drilling the point home here that only 11% of cross-border philanthropy funding went directly to local organizations between 20 and 23, and approximately 89 flowed with international entities. Again, increasingly speaks to localization and shifting of power is what needs to happen within the region, and that the allocation of capital has not shifted at the same pace. And this is something that we need to do a lot about. We all know what happened with the US Foreign Service. That was a strong demonstration for all of us in the region, Latin America and the Caribbean. UNAIDS reported that in Jamaica, approximately 70% of HIV resources came from external sources, with around half of the services supported by PEPFAR, which is Emergency Plan and AIDS Relief Fund out of the United States. And that significantly disrupted service continuity across the region and particularly in our civil society. And so what we're talking about is not esoteric. It has to happen. We have to change our funding structures, and we have to ensure that we continue to be resilient. And one way in which we can be resilient is through diversification of resources in terms of where resources reside and where they go and where they land. Few more slides here, just to say that data is not the destination here. Data is the infrastructure, so we need to work together to ensure that we map capital actors, gaps and flows. We decide who uses Caribbean evidence to establish priorities. We need to align, connect our funders around shared opportunities, and we need to move and direct philanthropy investment towards credible pipelines and track what changes and for whom. I would say that my provocation here this time must become part of the regional capital architecture. We just have to make it happen. Philanthropy must be inside the capital architecture. Caribbean needs capital for climate resilience, it needs capital for food systems, energy, health, enterprise, technology, infrastructure. We need to make that happen. The Caribbean international market for green social sustainability is linked, and blue bonds reached approximately $2 billion. So the question is not simply does capital exist? It does exist. And again, the issue, can Caribbean institutions and projects access it? And with that, we need to use different forms of capital for our purposes. And we also need to figure out very distinctively how philanthropy can connect, how can it de-risk, how can it test and unlock capital within the region. And we also need to build the pipelines and provide the technical assistance to make sure that it happens. A couple more examples I wanted to say is that we do have organizations like Climate Smart Accelerator here working on climate solutions and investment pipelines. We have Clara Lionel Foundation here that brings Caribbean rooted philanthropy approach to climate resilience. Cariful is also working with Wings, and we're working with the Philanthropy for Climate movement, asking philanthropy to invest differently to support climate action and climate solutions. And that the power is often in what we can unlock. And this is, I think, our opportunity for the region. So for the design for the Caribbean, we actually have to ask some quick questions. We can ask it together later. What if generosity was treated as an asset, not an antidote? What if locally led organizations are visible before a crisis? What would happen? What if we had data who gets funded, not just gets released? What if diaspora giving becomes a pathway to long-term investment? And what if Caribbean philanthropy helps shape capital and not simply distribute it? And I'll say my last um, um, PowerPoint for the group is that how Careful is building it now, and what we're doing, we're just trying to translate it into a global infrastructure here within the region across 22 countries. We know, that data matters, so we need to create those trusted pathways for generosity, and we need to connect as much as we can. And we have a structure that we use in terms of creating giving affiliates, communities of practice, and a council, and looking at ways in which we can strengthen institutional readiness and philanthropy and investment within the region. I was going to talk a little bit about women and just say that this is also our opportunity that we need to look at as well, in terms of ways in which we can mobilize resources to women who are the mobilizers within the region, and to give them ownership and investment opportunities within the region. This is something that we need to do. But I would just say that an enabling environment is not simply about generating more philanthropy. It's really about how we organize and develop the infrastructure for the region. So I would end here, and look forward to hearing from all of you and answering questions.
Thank you very much, Antia. You have shown us gaps regarding knowledge about domestic philanthropy, and there is a shared gap in with many countries in Latin America, and also the locally led development models, no, and that imbalance that you mentioned between international recipients and domestic organizations. So thank you very much for that and for the work that the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is doing. So from this example about this network in the Caribbean and how they are building or are moving towards an enabling conditions for philanthropy to thrive in the Caribbean. We're going to move to Colombia. Colombia brings a different but equally powerful approach, a national strategy led by government to expand the country's philanthropic ecosystem. So Ana Maria, over to you.
Thank you so much, Maria Eugenia. We're really happy to be here, and we're very grateful to Giving Tuesday for inviting us to this incredible event. I would first and foremost, before we begin, like to acknowledge that this has been a hard season for my country and for Venezuela. We're undergoing the emergency response to a harsh earthquake that affected over half of our departments. And it also has been a demonstration, a real life demonstration of what generosity actually means and how everybody has burst into giving and organizing and putting together all sorts of what we in theory called the 5 T's in favor of those that have been victims of these earthquakes. And I mention this because we definitely have to move from, and I think this is a very Latin American reality, including the Caribbean, and we have to move from a very short-minded, immediate responses to a more structural giving strategy. And in that sense, it is the first time that the national government of Colombia decided last year to create a Colombian philanthropy strategy. I'm just going to mention a few of the topics that we touch on, and I think they're going to be the most relevant, especially in dialogue with what Anthea mentioned about what the needs of the civil society are, because we're very proud to have created an architecture that hopefully attends not only to the giving strategy from donors and the agendas from the donors, but also to the realities that civil society needs to put together to access more funds. So just I'm sharing a few links so that you can read this. This document is in Spanish, but what I wanted to mention about this document is it was written last year, and it was a diagnosis of what happens in U.S. philanthropy towards Colombia in the past 10 years. So this had and because data is part of the infrastructure, we didn't even know how much financial funding we had gotten as a country in the last 10 years. There's a lot of conversation, but going back to the data gave us a lot of insight. So I'm sharing this document to also to let you know that it is based on data that we had a big we had a year to understand what the ecosystem looked like. And we obviously chose to look at the US philanthropic environment because it's more transparent. As you know, the data is available publicly. And so with that, we could create the base for what we designed. And I'm going to do a big summary because these are long documents. But in summary, I'm going to share two findings. So the first one was that 1.8% of donors give 65% of the money. So we're going to call those the big players. And basically, it means that Colombia has nearly 18 big players. It's not a big number of donors, but they are donors that are very significant, not only nationally, but also regionally. Most of these donors don't only invest in Colombia as a country, but for example, in the Amazon region or in the Andean region, and they have opened their regional offices in Bogota, but they attend to some of them Peru, Ecuador, some of them to regions of the Amazon basin in Venezuela, Brazil, Peru. I mean, so we are regional. So we try to separate the money that actually came to within the Colombian frontiers, and this is what played off. But the other fact is really, really interesting, and I think it talks about these locally led organizations and agendas. And it is that 54% of the individual contributions that the country received were less than $100,000. And $100,000 in the philanthropic environment is not much. It's considered a very small donation. Yet, for a small periphery organization in a rural area in Colombia, it can mean the difference between existing today or for a year. So we analyzed that phenomenon more closely, and we created the philanthropy strategy in two tiers. One tier to increase fundraising, bring more money, help these big players stay in Colombia and bring their partners to Colombia. And that's part of what we're going to do. But that is the obvious. If you know that you have big donors and that you have where you're obviously going to create a service for them. What is not so obvious is that we are strengthening the democratizing effect of having individual donors give smaller donations to organizations that are not as central and that are not as prepared to receive international donations. And so with these two tiers, this is a very synthetic diagram of what the philanthropy strategy is about. So we created a strategic goal. We analyzed multiple variables, including also the philanthropic market from Europe, as it is changing from international cooperation as we know it into a more private investment and impact investment logic. And we have committed to changing, going from 0.04% of the philanthropic market, which is what we had achieved in the past 10 years, to 0.5% in the next 10 years, which is the period of the philanthropy strategy. That is a big leap because it multiplies by 12.5 what we received between 2015 and 2024. But we also think it's viable because what we received during the past 10 years was absolutely accidental. So nobody's there thinking about how to lead a strategy, how to create an architecture, an infrastructure, data production, and also the readiness for the civil society organizations that are going to be more prepared to access international funding. One thing there that is important to take note about the organization I work for, my organization is the International Cooperation Agency of the Presidency of Colombia. It's a public entity. And so what we are developing here is an architecture for coordination, for leadership coordination of different actors. And so again, remembering the two tiers that I mentioned before, so for each of those tiers, we have a set of strategies. And we thought about this strategy to be very, very practical so that it could be readily implemented. So we have, on the side of governance and architecture for allies, we have partnerships with local philanthropy to attract bigger players and stakeholders, and also to help the ones that we already have here to be comfortable and stay in Colombia and increase their funding. And for that, we built 3 new desks. A desk for the big players, a desk for ongoing philanthropy. And here I'm going to explain a little bit of what we found in the data. And it is that we have multiple smaller philanthropic organizations funded with international funds from all over the world that have been working in Colombia for over 30 years or 20 years. I mean, they have really settled in. They have much less funding than those huge players, but because they have been historically in the land and working in the field with communities, they have a very deep knowledge of Colombia. And so we also not only the variable of having money is the one that we think that we should provide public services to, but also provide to those who have been and who have stayed in Colombia for a long time and know territories pretty well. And then we built a third desk for fiscal sponsors. One of the findings that we had when we were developing the national strategy is the idea of fiscal sponsorship was a very it was it wasn't really known to the ecosystem. Some of the organizations, the big organizations that have fiscal sponsors and that have fundraisers, had kept quiet about this strategy, and only a few organizations that have had access knew about fiscal sponsorship and about how relatively easy it is to be represented fiscally in different countries to be able to attract funding. So we went from not having any knowledge about fiscal sponsors. Now this desk has 20 fiscal sponsors globally, and we are together developing strategies to strengthen civil society into access to fiscal sponsorship. The other thing that we have, the other tier, is tools. So as I was mentioning, teaching the ecosystem of organizations about what a fiscal sponsor is, about what benefits they bring, about due diligence and all the capacities that they must have in transparency, in impact measurement to access better funds. And with fiscal sponsorships, things like coordinating our efforts to participate together in, for example, DAF Day 2026, which will take place in October. The other thing that we've been really working on is collective philanthropy. One of our best alliances is definitely Giving Tuesday, where we promote a culture of collective giving. And also Philanthropy Together has been an incredible partner in advancing this kind of logic in philanthropy. Not only thinking about who are the trillionaires of the world, but also thinking about how everybody can chip in and give together to advance causes from civil society. There are two targets that are of interest to Colombian organizations internationally. One, Colombia has 5.2 million people in its diaspora globally. This diaspora, for example, now for the emergency caused by the earthquake, has really mobilized globally and has brought in a lot of resources, and we have brought in airplanes full of help from different parts of the world. So the diaspora exists and it has a dynamic that wants to support organizations. Again, here what we need to do is we need to help all these diaspora members to understand that maybe they should not give only spontaneously for the emergency, but also maybe to partner with organizations that they trust and become loyal donors to those causes. And the other source that we think is of interest is tourism. Colombia has become one of the tourism areas in the country. And many visitors to Colombia go to rural areas off the beaten path, and they want to support organizations that are there. Some of the donations that we found when we were doing the study are as small as $2,000, $4,000. And what we discovered by following the money is that they belong to tourists that wanted to do a very specific help to one organization or a place that they had visited where they wanted to leave the money. So Colombia receives over 7 million visitors per year, and we think that there is also a source that we're trying to teach organizations, civil society organizations, to not only attract the first donation, but to sustain and really create loyalty with those donors. So we have the desks, and we are creating a platform for the promotion of the organizations of civil society that actually have fiscal sponsors and are doing an international outreach effort. Again, the three things in the bottom are, who are we partnering? So it's the public sector with civil society organizations, with organizations such as Giving Tuesday, but also such as the fiscal sponsors, who act as hubs for international promotion, not only of money making, but of the values that make generosity more strategic, like impact measurement and like quality accountability. So we've prepared a little brief in English for those of you who don't speak English. That's the smaller QR code. It's a summary of the strategy. And if you want to have the full strategy, then it's the bigger QR code. It's the full document in Spanish. Anyway, I just posted the link there. And I'm very proud also to share with you something that was really, really um, concrete implementation of the strategy in the past 2 weeks. So because of our partnership with all these fiscal sponsors, we had a chance to publish these pieces where we have already fundraised over $500,000 internationally through fiscal sponsors to local organizations that are supporting the earthquake relief efforts. So this is to show you how concrete and how specific the implementation can be, and how we really had a practical approach into this. If you want to follow us, I've shared the LinkedIn name and the Instagram handle. So if you want to know more. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm really expecting the questions.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Just a quick remark about both presentations is the role of data, no? I mean, in the Caribbean and Tia show us how building a shared data infrastructure is essential for visibility and coordination. And in your case, Ana Maria demonstrated how having data helped to design a national strategy with clear baselines and target and mechanisms. So I think that both experience remind us that you cannot strengthen generosity without first seeing it, no, and understanding how it happens, etc., etc. So thank you very much. We are now going to open the floor for questions that you may have. So you all are welcome to ask questions to our speakers. Please raise your hand if you want to ask a question or state it on the chat.
I see everybody is so quiet, so I'm just going to
I
jump
know.
in.
That's wonderful.
I know these are two entirely different countries, Colombia and the Caribbean region, and a set of countries and different geographies, different cultures, and two different approaches. One is through working with government, one is working, from the social sector. But if we are listening to you from other countries, and maybe we don't think that we can do this on a national scale, but we could maybe do this at a local scale, or we could put together a group of organizations that could try and put together platforms or peoples or alliances, what would be the first steps to encouraging people to see that this is important, that we need to design for philanthropy? What are those first small steps that you think we should take?
Well, I don't know if it's small steps, but just important steps that need to be taken, and that we have to think about. They have to think about the environment in where they are operating. I think that's one of the steps that they have to take. They have to take stock of who is in their environment, whether it's a wonderful government like Colombia that understands intrinsically how philanthropy should operate, or are they in a space where government is hardlined and does not have an understanding of what philanthropy is. So I think, taking stock of the environment is important. The other piece would be, just focusing on what is it that they want to do with the resources that they're going to bring to the table, whether large or small. If it's going to be $500,000, if it's going to be $10,000, like the questions that we ask ourselves right now is, when that money comes on the table, how is it going to make an impact at the end of the day? And how are we going to track that impact? And do we have the systems in place to do that? So if a small group comes together, at the end of it, they want to do it again, they have to know how those resources have made a difference. And so they have to connect to those places, people that they want to create an impact for and build the relationships that are necessary. And I think it's really, we have to just speak truth to what we know works. And we know what works is that you can have resources and you can have money dangling, but if you don't have the relationships, it's not going to make the difference. So if you're a small group, you have to have the relationships in the community. You have to have those connections. You have to believe that they have the ability to be able to make decisions on the resources that they receive. And if they don't, you have to build their capacity to do that, all those things. But I would just say environment first, focus on what is it that you want to do. And then, of course, focus on the impact and then how you're going to track that impact. If you're a small group, or if you're a big group, it's a little different. But if you're a small group, which is what I think you're asking, um, they have to come together.
I would quickly add a couple of things to that question. Is my first step would definitely be to find local philanthropy and to understand what they're investing on, because it's always easier to get matching grants than to go and ask for everything. So I would definitely create a strong partnership with local philanthropy. And then the second thing I would invest my effort is in finding organizations, even if they're very grassroots, that are doing a great job. Finding a way to, so eventually you're going to end up connecting that local philanthropy to the great grassroots, because you're going to create like a type of capillarity of the resources. But my first two steps would be that.
Well, thank you,
Wonderful, thank
Anna,
you.
and Anthea for the question and for the answers, and Anita for the question. I see a question on the chat from Fabian Bacuilima. So, Fabian, please, you are welcome to open your mic and share the question with us. Well, it seems like Fabian says that he cannot open the mic. So the question of Fabian is about infrastructure. So he's asking how to reach out to them. We still don't know who is
Yeah,
them, but how to reach
I
out to them to
I can give it a
get the
shot,
support.
but
Okay, go
I
ahead.
have to guess what them, who is them. So my shot on them is, he's probably
Donors.
asking, or fiscal sponsors. I mean, either.
Mhm.
So I'll go ahead and say both. So fiscal sponsors are available online. You can actually Google them. The United States has over 1,500 fiscal sponsors. These fiscal sponsors exist in the US and are legal. 60 years ago, they're organizations whose mission is basically to help organizations get resources that are not ready to be 501(c)(3) in the United States, and they can be international. Um, you really have to find out more about that. But the other thing is that I really don't think donors are so far away, because we obviously, if we think the donor is Rockefeller, then it's really hard, right? It's really hard to reach. But when we go to collective philanthropy, your main first donor might be a person from the diaspora that belongs to your family, that can create a giving circle wherever they live, and that they can create fun experiences that help fundraise for your organization. I'll give you an example. The French, the Colombians living in France have created a concert with Manu Chao to send money for the earthquake response. Yeah. So I really think that it's a thing of friendship and really creating coalition with the people you know that are based internationally. But we don't know about them enough. We don't say happy birthday to people. And I think that we definitely have to build stronger social relationships so that we can then get support from those people that are elsewhere.
And also, I think strengthening locally led institutions, I think, is one way to go. The big issue about money and funding and cross-border philanthropy also has to do with trust and developing trusted entities that they can feel that the money goes where it's supposed to go. And so one of the ways in which you could do that, of course, is, channeling resources to build the capacity of these locally led institutions so that when resources come, that they are able to make a case about how the financial how the resources have been used. And so I would say that, locally led organizations and institutions, you have to have strong knowledge of where those are, connect to the intermediaries within the region. And Maria mentioned local foundations. I think that is one way to go. Of course, if you have a philanthropic ecosystem, what we're building, you can come to us, whether it's, and there are those that exist, across the region. They would have a strong knowledge of where those resources could be placed and who you could connect to. But the trust factor is very important. And the only way you can get that is if people on the ground who can actually vet those entities that are in the space. So the vetting process is also quite important as well.
Well, thank you, Auntie Anna and Ana Maria, for your answers. We have a question on the chat, and I see that Villana Daki raised her hand or their hand. So we have a few minutes remaining, so please be brief in your interventions. So Vihana, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question for Ana Maria. Maybe I missed it in the presentation. So basically, when we have a situation where money is collected either by diaspora or by fiscal sponsors outside of Colombia or by some global platforms, what does the government of Colombia do to facilitate the transfer of this money to the country? Because what we had as a problem here in Serbia and the wider region is that the National Bank of Serbia was really not willing to basically open up opportunities for easy transfer of cross-border philanthropy money. Thank you.
I'll do my best to do this fast. Great question, Villana. One of the reasons why we're focusing on fiscal sponsorship is exactly that one. Because when donations come directly, they don't get enough due diligence. While fiscal sponsors, because they have to commit to the rules of their nations of origin. So if you're in France, France, if you're in Spain, Spain, if you're in the US, US, they have very strong rules about what money they receive, what they know about the money they receive, and they guarantee that it is actually philanthropic, which gives certainty to your bank system when the money comes in. So I would go and look for...
They're benevolent, like in your case.
No, but I mean, my country has problems with money laundering that are huge, and the bank is very distrustful. The bank system is very distrustful, but there's probably fiscal sponsors that are already moving money into Serbia, trustworthy, in a trustworthy way. So just strengthen that bond and bring the money, the philanthropic money, through there, and then strengthen due diligence. I think that's the way to do this.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. And the final question on the chat, I think that it can apply to both organizations. And is how can you reflect on how the government and a network as the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance came to view philanthropy as an opportunity? Do you know what led to this and how thinking evolved over time? So
I didn't understand the question,
in 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I would just say that we are very dedicated to creating that enabling environment that is required for funding and resources to move smoothly and effectively across the region. And to do that, we have to work with governments such as, like the ones that if we could have a government like your organization in the Caribbean where they're adjusting policies and regulations and developing the financial infrastructure, then that is what will be required, and data transparency, all those things are necessary in order for philanthropy to flow well. So the enabling environment, I think, is something that is critical for philanthropy to be most effective within the region.
Thank you, Anthea. Ana Maria?
Again, very shortly, I think there was a big crisis when USAID left last year because Colombia was highly dependent on the funds from USAID. And crisis always brings opportunity. And that's where people started thinking, oh my goodness, we have to create an enabling environment for these new types of private fund, like, and we're really thinking about other things that we can do, but we had to launch a strategy so that we can raise our hands and say, okay, we're ready for this, and help organize the ecosystem in a if you read the document, you'll see it's basically an architecture so that funding and tiers come in better.
Well, thank you, Ana Maria and Anthea. And I think that this reflection about the enabling environment is something that we can continue speaking about. So thank you very much for joining this session to all of you. There are more sessions today. I think that there are in the next few hours more panels, so you are welcome to join them. And thank you, Anthea, again, and Ana Maria, for showing these experiences from a region like the Caribbean and a country like Colombia. So thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria.